Well, hello everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and it's my great joy to be with Kshama today. And we're going to be continuing conversations with Asha, Millennials Speak. There were many reasons why we started this, not the least of which is there's a whole very extraordinary, dynamic team of Ananda leaders who are of a generation or two behind those of us who founded Ananda, but have in their consciousness and in their nature, they have the same dedication and the same zeal of true devotees born to serve Master's work. When I was their age, their stage of life in the spiritual path, there was no generation in front of us. We were the founding generation, and so we were the face of Ananda. What's happened in the last 50 years is that the face of Ananda has sort of stayed on a few of us, it's not a few, on a large crowd of us who sort of came up together. And I thought it would be really nice to sort of help bridge the gap by helping all of you to get to know some of these people as I know them. They're not unknown to you by any means, but all of this opportunity to broadcast has opened up possibilities and conversations with millennials and letting millennials talk about what the spiritual path looks like to them. Not only will introduce them to those of you who are longtime Ananda people, but I feel that there are many in many of their own people, so to speak, their tribe is the way I think about it, who perhaps can discover something about the spiritual path that speaks to their particular life experience through the experience of these souls. So with no further introduction, Kshama, tell us a little bit about how you started out in life, what your early life was like, how you just give me a short version and I'll interrupt you periodically with more questions.
Okay, I can do that.
Uh-huh.
My family actually raised me at Ananda village. My grandparents were disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda also, and gave the autobiography of a yogi to my parents when I was very small. By the time I was, I think, 2, we had moved to the meditation retreat. And I spent a majority of my childhood living at various places on the Ananda Village property, the meditation retreat property, and then some of our World Brotherhood colonies around the world. Palo Alto was one of them several times, and Ananda Sisi, and other places like that.
When you were a child, were you conscious of the fact that the environment you were living in was unusual? Did you have any point of contrast, cousins or anything like that that gave you a point of contrast?
Maybe little touch points. Yeah, certainly visiting other family members' homes and things, it was clear that there was some level of difference. But when you're a child and your reality is mostly what you've known and grown up with, there's a sort of normalcy to it. So I don't think I was as aware of how dramatically different my childhood was from other people's.
When did you begin to figure that out?
When I was 11, I went, my family, one side of my family moved to Ananda Sisi, and there was no living wisdom school in Europe at that time. And so I was enrolled in Italian public school.
You went to Italian public school? Okay.
Oh, I did. Yeah, just down the street from the Basilica of St. Clair in Assisi.
Wow.
And I rode the school bus every day, and I went to school with, there were beautiful teachers. So it was a wonderful experience, but it was very different from a living wisdom school experience. I had teachers that were still smoking in the classroom, and corporal punishment was a little bit of a reality at that point. And I was learning a new language and learning to navigate new social norms. But I started to notice that there was a big difference in how children related to the world and how teachers interacted with children. And I think that was probably my first real awareness that what I had been receiving was precious.
Well, how did children relate differently? How did teachers relate differently?
It was more formal. And I think in the sense of not in terms of respect, but in terms of distance. So there's a lot of deep respect that's cultivated in the child-teacher relationship, and there's a level of graciousness that comes from that when there's real respect. And then there's also sort of an artificial line of respect that is based on fear or an us and them kind of dynamic. And so that was a little bit more present. I also was aware that consequences weren't addressed, or opportunities for learning weren't addressed in the same ways. And so when children were faced with an opportunity to learn a really important life lesson, there was a lack of awareness on the side of the teachers that I interacted with in terms of using it as a teaching moment, as opposed to just bringing in punishment-based discipline. So.
Well, skipping to the present, I know, I mean, you've been a teacher now for a dozen years. Is that long in the Living Wisdom School system? So even at the age of 11, you were evaluating a teacher's methods of teaching? Is that what you're telling me?
I hadn't thought about it like that, but I suppose so. Yeah, on some level.
What you just said there almost describes education for life. Instead of using opportunities to teach important lessons, punishment was offered instead. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that was unfair when you were a child, or did you just sort of observe it?
I found it bewildering, I think, which is probably where the awareness started to grow that there was something else that was happening in my prior education, and that it just didn't quite make sense the way that, it was my first experience with dealing with unkind people that weren't being supported in learning how to be more gracious, and I was left a little bit adrift. But it was also a precious time, and it was an incredible learning and expanding my own awareness of how the world works and how other people relate to it. So.
Well, then what comes to my mind is a question that people frequently ask about Ananda, about our educational system and about children raised in the community. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that your upbringing at Ananda, although it was kinder, since you used that word, did it leave you more or less prepared to deal with what you might call the real world, as people call it? Were you stronger or weaker because of it? What do you think?
I think personally I was a lot stronger. Okay. The saying, it takes a village to raise a child, I think was very, very true in my upbringing. And it was, on very, very practical levels, having mentors that taught me how to be, a meaningful employee and how to work with integrity. Teachers and parents and friends who immersed us in the natural world and helped us to cultivate a love for our earth. An exposure to, but not a pressure towards centering practices and meditation and things. So I think for me, I was able at different stages in my life to employ different tools that I had been given, or not employ them if I chose not to, but I had them. And eventually when I got hit over the head enough times, I decided to start using them more. So I think it really did prepare me in a lot of ways.
So you didn't finish high school with Ananda. By high school, you were off into public school again?
Yeah, I was with Living Wisdom most of the years until through my 7th grade year. And then I moved with my mom to the Carmel, Monterey area for 8th grade. I spent 8th grade there. And then by the time we moved back to Ananda, it was time for high school, and I went to the local public high school there.
So did you go to the public high school as a devotee of Paramahansa Yogananda, following the ways of Ananda, or did you just throw yourself into high school?
I was just a kid. And I think it was a vital experience. I don't know that I would have had the wherewithal or the perspective to come back to this path and to our practices if I hadn't really immersed myself in experimenting with a lot of other possibilities. Okay. So it was I can't say it was the most inspired or elevated period of my life, but I think high school was a really, really valuable experience also in learning.
You know, from the perspective, my perspective, where I have known your parents, you actually, I met your parents when you were 2, so you were already in the picture. But having known a lot of parents before they were children, and then they had their children, and all of us who were, you know, the founding members of Ananda, getting married, having families, we all were immensely curious as to how you all would turn out. You were kind of like a petri dish that we were looking at all the time. There's a statement in the Bhagavad Gita, it's actually chapter 6, verse 42. I know which one it is, 642. It says, if you strive for spiritual attainment and don't make it and have to be reborn, you'll get born into a family of yogis if you have very good karma. But such births are very hard to come by. So we would watch all of you and wonder, you know, but we had to say to each other, and this was the truth, we really didn't know what it would look like for a child to be born into a family of yogis and then grow up. Would they be just a pious little St. Clair, you know, from start to finish? Or would they be a St. Augustine who prayed intensely, make me a saint, but not yet?
I love that.
So when you went out larking about to see what the world had to offer, I mean, what was your experience, and why did you end up going back essentially to what you were born into?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'll just be really honest. I had a lot of fun until I didn't anymore.
Okay.
There was a real shifting point.
Let's hold that for a second.
Okay.
I had a lot of fun until I didn't. That was St. Augustine. Make me a saint, but not yet. Okay, so we had a lot of fun.
We had a lot of fun, and then the fun started to dry up. And I think what I was left with was, on the surface, a world and a life that I thought should be really fulfilling and looked like it was. You know, I was out of school. I had a good job. I was surrounded by friends. I had a wonderful relationship. I mean, all the little pieces were in place, and I started to increasingly feel like there was something missing. And the only way that I can describe it is almost like just a growing emptiness that I couldn't satisfy. I couldn't fill it back up. And my beautiful father kept reminding me of certain practices that I could do, and I would nod and smile and say, "Thanks, Dad." And and then I don't know, little shifts started to happen. I feel like enough emptiness came about that I started to be receptive, and Master just sort of took charge at that point. And then within 6 or 9 months, my whole life shifted. And, just like that, yeah.
And I believe you came to live here in Palo Alto at that time. Is that when you moved here?
Yeah, at the end of that period, job was different, home was different, living back in community, learning to meditate again. I'd taken discipleship. I'd been on pilgrimage to India. Just a radical turnaround.
How old were you at that point?
24.
24. That's the time when it happens astrologically. A great many people come to Ananda at the age of 24. Not all of us. And a lot of us who are founding members of Ananda are all born within a year of each other. There's a crowd of us. We haven't really had a mass exodus from the planet, but I think a lot of us incarnated at the same time, and I wonder if we're all going to just kind of start checking off at the same time. But
I don't know if you saw my face, but I will try not to have a response to that.
Well, I'll just be neutral about it. You can have a response to that. So when you came back into Ananda, let me think how to say it. I mean, actually, I'm going to prompt you, because you mentioned to me once that you did not go back to the community where you grew up, that you came to a different community. So can you sort of talk about making Ananda your own as opposed to being born into it?
Sure. So during that time period, I really just started trying to imagine where I could go and where I could live. And I knew a change was needed, but I hadn't zeroed in on what it was. And I noticed pretty quickly that all of the places that I was considering were places that had Ananda communities.
Mm-hmm.
And I had even visited Palo Alto and snuck in for Sunday service and then snuck out and didn't talk to anybody. And I don't think I'd been here in probably, 20 years or 15 years at that point. And so the invitation, actually, this is where I feel like I was more guided than anything. I wasn't actively seeking a role in the schools or employment, but a lot of things in my life started guiding me towards that. And I got a call from the school, unsolicited by me, inviting me to come down and interview for an internship. Mm-hmm. And it just, it was one of those decisions that on the surface didn't make any sense at all. And it was something that I just knew that I had to do. Mm-hmm. So I moved to Palo Alto, but I think it was really, really important that I start fresh in a space that where I wasn't completely defined by my childhood, who I was as a child or who I am in relationship to my family, because mm-hmm. I have both grandparents and parents who have been really a big part of Ananda for a very long time. And I don't know if I would have been able to find my personal connection both with Master and the Path or with the community if I was solely defined by who I'd been or who I am in relationship to my family.
I can certainly understand that. I know that, so you started when you were 24 as a teacher in the Living Wisdom mm-hmm. School, and you still are a teacher. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've done and what that means to you to be part of Living Wisdom education?
Big question.
I know it's a big question. Give me your answer in segments and I'll ask you questions in between.
I think for me, the school has become very clearly a central part of my discipleship and my journey. I think teaching in many ways is one of the fastest paths to sainthood. It's intense and it stretches the teacher in ways that you don't expect to be stretched, and it creates.
I want you to tell me, how does it stretch the teacher in ways you don't expect to be stressed? I know you started teaching second graders, right? Second grade, first grade, little tiny.
I spent about 10 years teaching first and second grade.
How did that stretch you in ways that you can't imagine? And how does that relate to discipleship? You just made those assumptions, but I haven't had experience. So tell me what your experience is.
I very, very quickly found that without a morning sadhana practice, my school days did not go as well as they could. There's a centering and a depth of intuitive flow that comes in when there's a strong meditation practice. So that became the motivation for me at the start, to make sure that my meditation practice was very steady and strong. Mm-hmm. I found that I had to, they say you've mastered something if you can teach it to someone else. Uh-huh. And so, even with small things, the things that you teach to first and second graders, the ability to get clear in my thinking and creative and flexible in my thinking and how to approach different subjects so that you could reach a whole variety of different students who have different ways of understanding the world and relating to the world. It was huge. Being able to support and relate to the needs of the parents, being able to help understand the underlying motivations of people's actions rather than just the action itself, and be able to help make incremental change in those ways. All of those were wonderful learnings in terms of how to support students, but then also for myself and for my inner growth.
Very good. Now, what is the essence of Living Wisdom education as opposed, for example, to the education you had in Italy when you were 11? Mm-hmm. Which is more like the education most people have.
We're looking at our children and our students as souls on their journey home, on their journey to self-realization. And so it's not, it is about the math facts and the ability to read and stuff, but those are vehicles to developing soul qualities in the children. And we're looking at them as whole beings and really trying to use the moments to help them grow in their expanding maturity and ability to relate to their own inner experiences and then the world around them with greater and greater awareness. So Swami says that the goal of education is for an individual to be able to relate to the realities of others, full expanded awareness and acceptance and understanding.
And I can see, I mean, as a teacher, you can't choose your children. I mean, the natural inclination to favor some and not favor others, or find some easy and some difficult, that would be the opposite of what you're trying to get the children to understand, isn't it?
And it's a beautiful practice to learn to love them completely and then also let them go. Every year there's this process of just feeding them and loving and supporting and helping them become the best that they can be. And then at the end of the year or 2 years or 3 years that you have them, just opening the cage and setting them free to journey on.
Well, I know you yourself have gone from first and second graders to a high school level now. So tell us what you're doing now.
I started this fall. I stepped in when Kabir McDowell, who's now in India, transitioned to help the work there. I transitioned over, left second grade, and stepped into directorship of our high school program. So I've gone from 7-year-olds to 17-year-olds.
How's that working for you, Kshama?
It's fantastic. It's absolutely wonderful. We have our school is small and growing and absolutely vibrant and beautiful. We have incredible students. We have a remarkably wonderful teaching staff, and it's a joy to be working on a project that has so much potential for expansion and creative growth.
So is it fundamentally different to be teaching teenagers instead of 7-year-olds? I mean, not some people think that 7-year-olds are cute, and not everyone thinks that 17-year-olds are cute. I mean, there's the adorable factor for little children that isn't necessarily there for teenagers. I'm not speaking for myself, but I'm speaking for the perception. How do you approach it? Do you approach it differently, or is it just fundamentally the same?
I think at the heart of it, more of it is the same than not. Certainly, teens are going through a dramatically different part of their life and their development, and finding ways to meet their needs and help them to really expand and grow is, in some ways, it's new for me, but also underlying it, there are some principles that just are enduring. We all want to be seen. We all want to be understood. We all want to be loved. We all want to have humor and friendship and connection and understanding. So I was wondering, as I made this transition over, how easily I would move from 7 to 17. We have 14 to 18-year-olds in the program. But what I've found is that they are absolutely wonderful and just as lovable and vibrant and fantastic as little ones.
Is there though a fundamental difference in the way you approach teenagers as opposed to the way you approach 7-year-olds?
Sure, yeah. So I mean, if we look at how the soul develops and the body develops, Swami talks about, and many educators have seen this over the years. There's a progressive development that happens when you're very, very small. The whole way that you relate to the world is through your physical body. Little people touch, taste, they want to run, they want to jump, they learn best through their bodies. And at some point, usually, I've taught first and second grade, so I was always watching this transition happen. 6, 7, 8-year-olds, they start to awaken to a more refined ability to relate to their feeling nature. And so there's a depth of perspective. Friendships become extremely important. Heroes and teaching ethics and morals and things through story becomes a really, really vibrant way for them to learn. And then as you go through so we're looking at sort of 6-year development periods, and there's, flow and flexibility with each of these. But after the body has been the primary focus, and then the expansion into feeling, we move into a time of life when children really need to experiment with their willpower and learn how they can impact and influence the world around them and themselves. And so, I think in a lot of ways, we see this as a time period that's very, very toxic. And we, as a society, are looking for ways of helping support our teenagers and our young people in making healthy choices. But really, at the heart of all of it, they're experimenting with their own capacity to influence their reality. And so the more we can find ways to give them outlets to challenge their will, to give them ways to positively impact the world around them, to empower them to find those avenues, the more healthful they become.
Well, it would seem to me that the entire essence of self-realization is developing your willpower to influence your reality. So are they getting, I don't know how to say, a religious education, a yoga education? How would you characterize it?
I think what we hold is certainly a spirit-centered education. When you're working with young people, I think this is one area where there are big differences. When you're working with young people, small children, there are certain approaches that activate and open the heart more easily. And with teenagers, especially teenagers that are coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, maybe religious or non-religious households, a society that is very, very highly skeptical of spirituality, religion, things like that. I think there's a level of cynicism that has built up in a lot of our children and young people. And so finding ways where we may not be talking about God, we may not be talking about religion in terms of practice, but the more they get tangible experiences of expansive qualities and an awareness of their innate connectedness with each other, with the world, with nature, I think what we're trying to do is aliven and wake up an inner experience that leaves them with a seed of something to seek out, either immediately if they're ready for it, or later on when they are looking for something. I mentioned at the beginning how my education and childhood very much informed my later life in terms of knowing that there were tools that I could come back to.
Right.
And even if I wasn't ready to implement them when they were offered, or as fully when they were offered, they were still there, and they were things that I could come back to. So we talk about energy and magnetism. We talk about centering practices. We do a lot of different types of meditation. And depending on the receptivity of the group or the individual, we try to give them a real life experience of what they may want to seek out more in future. I wouldn't call what we're doing a religious education, but I do think it's very much a spirit-centered one.
Right, exactly right. It's sort of, it's what you yourself said when I said, how was your life when you went away from your upbringing? And you said it was a great deal of fun.
It was.
And also, but then it stopped being fun. But then you knew that there was an alternative. I think that just about sets it up. And what you describe with working with the high schools is just that. Let's let them have experiences, and then those experiences will be their guide. That's that actually is the yogic path. The yogic path it's based on my experience. So if you give people experiences, because nobody does anything that they don't really believe in from their own lives, or at least they won't do it very long.
Yeah.
Well, Kshama, I know we could talk a whole lot longer. We've barely touched the surface. And so we'll see you again before too long. And thank you very much for sharing with us. We're very grateful.
Thank you, Asha. This was lovely.